Hi, this is Dr. John Grazel, and this synoptic video is called Timelines of Development. The purpose of this video is to understand the timelines of development. One has to realize there are different timelines and that they are interconnected to each other. And that to really understand the interconnectivities, one really has to study what happened. One just can't presume. We're going to try to present a way of doing that. We believe there are at least four timelines that you have to look at. One is the simplistic timeline of key events related to international development. When was it formed? When was USAID created? When were the Millennium Development Goals established? Very specific events that sort of let you keep in mind how things happened over time in relation to each other. Then there's a timeline of development themes. When did we begin talking about grants? When did we begin talking about loans for development? When did we begin stressing poverty? When did we begin talking about human rights? When did we begin being particularly concerned about trade being a factor? These are key themes that also have a timeline. Then what we discovered is there's a timeline that should be considered of key personalities. And there are so many personalities, to some extent, this has to again be fine-tuned to a particular circumstance one is interested in. In this case, we'll look quickly at the timeline of U.S. presidents. And the last timeline is the timeline of big affecting circumstances. And these are circumstances that do not necessarily seem as they are automatically related to a timeline of development or foreign assistance, but actually, after study, one discovers they are. Here's a quick example. If you put these together, what do you find? You find, first of all, that the presidents, if you look at the presidents of the United States and their domestic political ideology, you find that it lines up very much with the international ideological themes of development assistance of their administration. That now might not sound so astounding, one said, but it's very often not realized how much that colors the decisions made and also creates a circumstance of constant turmoil and change every time an American president is elected. So, for instance, Jimmy Carter, strong emphasis on human rights. Ronald Reagan, a strong emphasis on downscaling government that corresponded with something called structural adjustment as a theme. An idea of causing developing nations to greatly reduce their government employee and government programs. Then, when you begin looking at key events, you also realize how they play a role. So it's very, very interesting to see how the Millennium Development Goals very much arrive after the breakdown of the consensus that surrounded foreign assistance that was built on a Cold War justification of having to promote sort of what the democracies could do for the world compared to what the communist formula could do for the world. You see where when France decides to abolish its cooperation ministry, which was a very, very powerful force, but was also built on the experiences of the French as a colonial power and how they felt about their colonies, how it dramatically changed France's involvement to it. So you have to look at these in order, in order to see why did certain things come to the forefront and why did certain things not come to the forefront. Then, as I said, there are this fourth timeline of surrounding events. Now, some of these surrounding events, it seems almost obvious how powerful they were as influences on development. So, the end of World War II and the Marshall Plan, the outbreak of 9/11 and Iraq and the total reallocation of aid in the United States, the extent to which the decolonization and nation building directly related to the type of development assistance that was first envisioned by President Eisenhower and then led President Kennedy to establish USAID and gave a certain consistency till the end of the Cold War. But then there are things that we discovered that seem to have had greater importance that one would never have thought of, except that one discovers it. One of the most interesting to me was in researching President Eisenhower's belief in what he called waging peace. It became very clear from documents that Khrushchev's speech, which he gave, in which he denounced Stalin, was a major influence on President Eisenhower and his advisors. They saw that speech as a turning point in how the United States should relate to the Soviet Union and how its foreign assistance program should relate. Before that, they saw the Soviet Union almost as an aggressive power that they had to push back, defend against. They saw Khrushchev's speech as an admission that the Soviet system was itself beginning to enter into a period of collapse. And it was no longer a case of sort of defending against it. It required a more proactive policy for defining the alternative, and very much corresponded to what Eisenhower hoped to create, which was a principle-based program of waging peace. And then you have a whole series of these summits, civil society summits, that could be events of development, but when you look at them as saying, regardless of what they were about, the phenomena of civil society summits itself dramatically affects how the donors themselves have to begin framing what they believe in and who they justify it to. Because of this discovery of the phenomena that civil society itself can organize events on a global level that actually change the empowering of surrounding circumstances. This is the final conclusions that we reach that I think are very important. When you look at foreign assistance, it's actually the big events that are most important. From the end of World War II to the end of the Cold War, these actually sort of are the shocks that make dramatic changes in reorientations of foreign assistance. How that reorientation occurs is clearly influenced by key individuals who are in positions of power at that time. And as I said, they could be American presidents. It could also be bureaucrats within these organizations that remain largely unknown but have tremendous influences. And it could be people in civil society. The themes of development on which we spend so much time, private investment versus public assistance, human rights, loans, actually seem not to be as causally important as we think. They all exist and they all continue. It's more a matter of they expand and contract proportionally to each other at any particular moment in time based upon the larger things that are happening and the individuals involved. And the last thing is that the programmatic aspects that people give so much importance to, microloans, microfinance, particular development goals, particular ways of approaching, do we do vaccination or otherwise, these programmatic activities actually are manifestations of the other three factors. They very often, they are not the key, but they are really just ways those manifest themselves in the world. And it's important to understand that because very often that understanding gets reversed and people mistake means and ends, and therefore actually in many cases work against the efforts of international development coming together and producing what we aspire for, which is true transformation.